Hey everybody, this is part 3, Human Relationships, Emotions. And we're talking about anxiety. And so anxiety is a perception of danger. Okay? Part of that is unconscious, and part of that is conscious. It moves from unconsciousness to consciousness as your body is warned unconsciously that there's danger. But you could also alert your body consciously to anxiety by scanning the environment and deciding that something is dangerous. So it goes in both directions. A second purpose of anxiety is to register in some ways that you are being inspected or evaluated. Okay, so this is strictly a human thing, I suspect. But test anxiety falls in this category. So does stage fright, yes. So does first date jitters. Okay? And the third function is a very important one. This signals anxiety, impending boundary violation. So if you see someone walking towards you on the street, you will notice it, you will gain a little bit of response to that. And if the person keeps heading towards you and maybe they're staring right at you, your anxiety will ramp up. Okay? But it won't be anger until they touch you. More on that in a moment. So we get to anger. Anger is an emotion that creates distance, separates, and creates boundaries between you and another person. That's the first purpose. And so that's why when you're mad at somebody, you go, "You're sleeping on the couch tonight." Or, "Get away from me." Yeah. It really is very effective in creating anxiety, and you may or may not know that many people who are angry a lot or irritable a lot are really, without them perhaps even knowing, trying to keep people away from them. Perhaps intimacy is anxiety provoking to them. Perhaps they feel that if others got close, they wouldn't like them, or that any number of reasons. Okay. And again, anger can be consciously induced or more reactive. In fact, many times anger emanates from anxiety, ultimately. The second thing anger does is it energizes us. It creates lots of energy. That's why teams in the same state, OSU and OU, get angry with each other and get into tussles on the field. It creates a lot of energy. Now, maybe they don't understand that consciously, but it certainly does. You see prize fighters squaring off in the beginning. That's intimidation, but it's also contempt, which I think is a form of anger. You see it on their faces, and also anger. And then the third thing is that it signals boundary abuse. So whereas anxiety signals boundary approachment, anger erupts on the heels of anxiety when boundaries are stepped on, and the boundaries being those of physical, emotional, cognitive, or spiritual. Okay? All right. So, what do you do with the information that you get about emotions? What is it that you get? What should you do with what you get? Well, first you have to decide what the emotion is and properly label it. This gives you an opportunity with children, doesn't it? Yeah. Then ask yourself, well, what is the purpose that it is serving? So in other words, you're aware of anxiety that you're experiencing, perhaps in your body, somewhere, your face, your heart, something. And then you correctly call it anxiety. Well, then am I being inspected or evaluated? Am I really in danger? Is there something actually dangerous right now? Yeah. Are some of my boundaries in jeopardy? Yeah. So what you're doing is you're challenging your emotion as to their validity by looking for evidence that confirms it. Okay? And if you can't confirm it, it may very well be that it is being produced erroneously and that the information you're getting does not represent reality. In some ways, this is the basis for the most popular form of therapy called cognitive behavior therapy. Now, ultimately, what you get is the ability to use the information you have to make better decisions, both in the very short term and in the long term. Okay? So in the short term, if there's nothing to be afraid of, then that can help you decide to use, if you need to, some way to calm yourself down and move forward. If it's a chronic thing, it's a pattern that you have, well, then that gives you information to make better decisions about whether to initially believe anxiety anytime you have it and to challenge it quickly. Okay. So let's talk a bit about this thing called emotional intelligence. I said we'd get back to that, and here we are. So emotional intelligence has a number of features. The first one is that you're having lots of accurate self-awareness. You're aware of what your emotions are. You're correctly labeling them. Okay, you're very aware of where you're feeling them in your body. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is you're able to manage those emotions. You know what to do with them, evaluate them as to their validity, what needs to be done in light of those emotions in that moment and then over time. And then the third thing is you're going to use emotions as a result of that clarity to maximize your ability to think clearly and to make decisions that are better. The more accurate data you have, the better decisions you make. And then the next feature of emotional intelligence is to optimize empathy. Okay? If we are able to separate out empathic induced emotion, for example, if you see someone with a spider on their arm, you might feel that same anxiety they have. That's empathic anxiety. From anxiety in which you're actually in danger, you can actually optimize your empathy in that regard. You are less likely to be what some call codependent. I don't necessarily love that term. I say creating internal boundaries as to what is and what is not your emotion, what is and what is not your responsibility, and what decisions you wish to make on those bases. And then the last thing, of course, pulls all this together, which is improving social relationships. No question about that. Now let's talk about emotional self-awareness, okay? Emotional self-awareness, it goes along with the idea that people with greater clarity and certainty about their emotional life are improved pilots of their lives. Okay? And the reverse is true. People with less clarity and less certainty about their emotional life, including strategies to deal with them, are reduced in their effectiveness in terms of piloting their own lives. Both directions are true, yes? So, knowing ourselves, it means recognizing body cues, labeling emotions clearly and accurately, staying open to unpleasant as well as pleasant emotions. You may not know this, but the way through and beyond unpleasant emotions is not to avoid them or jump over them or around them or pretend you don't have them and deny them. It's to move right towards them and through them. Accept them and move through them, okay? And then the last thing that knowing yourself is all about is recognizing and handling multiple emotions, and sometimes those emotions conflict, like in grief. You may, if someone important to you dies, feel a number of feelings, anxiety, existentially or otherwise, about life itself, wondering if you did everything you could have done, a kind of anxiety that manifests in questioning your behavior. You may be angry that the person left you, left responsibilities that you didn't want, that are big. Maybe you also feel relief, a kind of happiness that they're no longer in pain. Those are conflicting, and they can come and go and ebb and flow, and sometimes occur virtually simultaneously. All right. So a little exercise here. Create on a page 4 columns: happiness, sadness, anger, anxiety. Pause and do that. Okay. Now, I want you to list as many words as you can that you currently use as you think about conversations you've had with people when you're trying to communicate a particular kind of emotion, when you're trying to say, this is how I feel, and you're using words to describe those. So you're going to put as many of the words you actually use for beneath each of those columns, okay? So pause. And now back to the video, and you may see that you have the same word under more than one word title. So let's say you have the same word, let's say uncomfortable or upset beneath, say, sadness and anger. So if you're communicating with someone and you use the same word for both emotions, how do they know what you're feeling? They don't. They may make assumptions that are incorrect, right? Yeah. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to go into each column and prioritize on the basis of intensity. 1 being the lowest intensity and a 10 would being highest intensity. You're going to have some missing numbers. But in each column, give the words that you use for each and number intensity, okay? And just pause. Okay, so you have some with numbers missing. You have maybe some with higher numbers and no lower numbers, or you have some with very low numbers and not very high numbers. And you can easily interpret this in a qualitative way. If you went right to an emotion, had lots of words for it, and you have lots of high intensity, well, this is an emotion you're real familiar with, you're real commonly responding with this emotion, and if there's a lot of high numbers in there and not very many low, you feel this in great amounts. See? Because these were words you said you used in conversations. If you have one with a lot of low numbers and not high numbers, you're probably inhibiting the discussion of the production of those words to describe that emotion. You're inhibiting that emotional expression. That makes sense? Okay. If you have full ranges for any given emotion, you're comfortable with that emotion at all levels, and you have lots of different words to describe that level in different intensities. And then if you have full range in more than one, and particularly all 4, you've got a wide repertoire of words that mean different intensities. Now, a couple things to be aware of. Different people use different words to mean different intensities. So you may, although you're clear to yourself and maybe clear to most people, you're not going to be clear to everybody about what and how much you're feeling. Okay? When I do this with couples, this little exercise, you'd be surprised at how many couples that have been together quite a long time. They're surprised to learn what this emotion is and what it's not. They made assumptions. And we tend to make assumptions about the way we use words, that another person uses them the same way. Okay? And that's not true. So what we want to do is educate others, particularly those close to us, about what words we use to mean what emotion and in what intensity. Go figure. Improves things quite a bit. So, can basic emotions overwhelm rational thinking? Yes. It does so on a regular basis. In fact, the connections between the limbic system, the amygdala really, and the prefrontal cortex right here are like superhighways, like I-35 and I-40. And in the other direction, the connections between this part of the brain, which is about impulse control and decision-making and other things, the roads from there back to the amygdala are just they're dirt roads, 2-lane dirt roads, 1-lane dirt roads. So we have a hard time controlling our base emotions. We can, with practice, make more sense of them and therefore do more with them. Can rational thinking override strong emotion? Well, as I said, lots of practice, strategy, Yeah. Okay. Now, out of control emotions, the ones that override are prefrontal cortex, this area right here behind here, impairs our ability to reason. That's why you can't think straight when you are very anxious. You can't think clearly. You're all over the place. Okay? So the amygdala is overpowering the prefrontal cortex. That makes for worse decisions. Decisions not as good for you and others. And it can actually increase over time, if it continues long enough, increase the risk for chronic emotional issues. Okay? People who are not in charge of their emotions are more subject to conflict, as you might imagine, and they tend more towards anxiety and depression, and are generally less effective and less happy. People who run with their emotions, and there are some who actually feel most alive when they're expressing their strongest emotions, are sometimes labeled as drama kings and drama queens, people who love drama and love emotions, and emotionality is their juice, That's problematic. They may be the life of the party sometimes, but it gets to be old real quickly. Yeah. Let's talk for a minute about empathy in our next segment.